You know, if there's one single building in all of Rome that has truly seen it all, this is it. For almost 2,000 years, Castel Sant'Angelo has stood guard over the Tiber River, and it's changed its identity more times than you can count. It's been a tomb, a fortress, a palace, and a prison. So, let's dive into this incredible story, a story that's literally written in stone.
So, right off the bat, we're faced with a heck of a question, aren't we? The building's name is a total contradiction. It started out as this grand monument to a pagan Roman emperor, but now its name celebrates a Christian archangel. How on earth does that happen? Well, to figure that out, we've got to go way back to the beginning.
Our story kicks off not with angels or popes, but with one of Rome's most famous emperors, Hadrian. Picture this, it's the year 123 AD, and he decides he needs a final resting place, something that's not just a tomb, but a statement, something that would shout Roman power for centuries to come. And this is a really crucial point. This thing was never, ever meant to be a castle. It was a mausoleum. So think of the grandest, most magnificent tomb you could possibly imagine, built to hold the ashes of Hadrian, his wife, and basically his entire imperial dynasty. Wow, just take a look at this reconstruction. This is what it was designed to look like, and it was an absolute masterpiece of imperial bling. It was finished around 1390 AD, and it is a world away from the tough-looking fortress we see today. It was all about power, for sure, but also about art. Okay, so let's break down just how unbelievably opulent this thing was. It all started with this massive square base, totally covered in gleaming white marble. Then, your eyes would travel up these two giant stacked cylinders. And get this, the top wasn't a roof, it was a garden filled with cypress trees. And the cherry on top? Beautiful bronze statues everywhere, crowned by a massive bronze chariot with a statue of the emperor himself, looking out over his city.
And you know, for almost a century, it did its job perfectly. The ashes of a whole line of Roman emperors were laid to rest here, starting with Hadrian and going all the way to Caracalla in 217 AD. It was the ultimate family tomb for the ruling dynasty. But, well, empires have a tendency not to last forever.
And this is where the story takes its first huge, dramatic turn. As the Roman Empire started to crumble, the city's priorities changed big time. People weren't so concerned with eternal glory anymore. They were worried about, immediate survival. And that magnificent tomb by the river, it was just too big, too strong, and in the perfect strategic location to ignore. And that change happened shockingly fast. By 401 AD, boom, it's an official fortress, part of the city's main defensive walls. Just over a century later, when the Goths are attacking the city, those beautiful statues are being ripped off and hurled down at the invaders below. Fast forward to 1367, and it officially belongs to the church. And its job as a papal safe house was brutally proven in 1527 when Pope Clement VII had to run for his life and hide here during the horrifying sack of Rome. So how did the Pope make his escape? Through this. The Passetto di Borgo. It's basically an 800-meter-long secret passage, a fortified corridor built right on top of an old wall, connecting the Vatican directly to the castle. It was the Pope's ultimate panic button. When things got bad in Rome, this was their lifeline. All right, let's jump ahead to the Renaissance, because this is when the castle gets a really serious case of split personality. At the exact same time, it becomes a place of incredible, over-the-top luxury and a place of unimaginable suffering. It was both a palace and one of the most feared prisons in Europe. I mean, the contradiction here is just insane. Imagine, upstairs, you've got popes living in absolute splendor, and apartments covered with stunning frescoes, holding lavish parties, enjoying beautiful gardens. But then literally, right under their feet, in the dark, damp dungeons, people like the famous philosopher Giordano Bruno were locked away and left to rot. One of the most famous prisoners ever held here was the artist Benvenuto Cellini. In his autobiography, he talks about his time in the castle not just as a prisoner, but as a defender during that sack of Rome. This quote is just amazing because it shows how blurred the lines were. He was a prisoner, and yet he was up on the walls firing cannons. What a place. So with a history this intense, it's really no surprise that the castle became this hotbed for dark stories, grim realities, and even a little bit of magic. This is where the legends really start to fly. First up, a real-life figure who sounds like he's straight out of a horror movie, Mastro Tita. For 68 years, this guy was the official executioner for the Papal States, and a lot of his work happened right here.
And the weirdest part? His side hustle was selling umbrellas. I'm not kidding.
And his career was prolific. Over his nearly 70 years of service, he carried out more than 500 death sentences. Just let that number sink in. Over 500. It's a staggering figure that tells you a lot about the kind of justice that was centered in this very building.
And of course, a place like this has to have ghosts. The most famous is Beatrice Cenci. She was a young noblewoman who was executed for plotting to kill her terribly abusive father. Legend has it that every single year, on the anniversary of her death, her ghost walks across the bridge leading to the castle, carrying her own head.
And for a little touch of magic, there's the story of the magician Bellardo. The legend says he was locked deep in the dungeons, so he supposedly took a burnt twig, drew a boat on his cell wall, said a few magic words, and the boat peeled right off the stone, letting him and other prisoners sail away to freedom on the river. You gotta love that story.
Which, at long last, brings us back to our central question. With all this history of emperors, popes, prisoners, and magicians, where in the world does the angel come from? Well, the answer is found in a moment of absolute desperation and faith. Okay, so the year is 590 AD. A terrible plague is tearing through Rome. The Pope at the time, Gregory the Great, leads this massive religious procession through the city, praying for it to end. As they get near Hadrian's old tomb, he looks up and he has a vision. He sees the Archangel Michael standing on top of the mausoleum, putting his sword back into its scabbard. This was taken as a sign directly from God that the plague was over. And so, in that moment, Hadrian's mausoleum was renamed Castel Sant'Angelo, the Castle of the Holy Angel.
So when you look at Castel Sant'Angelo today, you're not just seeing one building. You're really seeing the entire, epic, and often brutal story of Rome, with each chapter layered right on top of the last.
I mean, just think about the incredible journey this place has been on. It was born as an imperial mausoleum. It became a military fortress. It was turned into a fortified papal residence, then a dreaded state prison. It became a stage for myths and legends, and today it's living its sixth life as a national museum where we can walk through all those other lives.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought. If these ancient stones could actually talk, what story would they tell? Would it be a story of imperial glory, of absolute papal power, of incredible artistic genius? Or would it be a story of the deep human despair of the prisoners in those dungeons? The truth is, it would have to be all of them, all at once.